The office was supposed to be empty, but as Charlotte Sinclair stepped into the dimly lit kitchen, the smell of fresh food stopped her cold. A man stood at the stove. Calm. Focused. Like he belonged there. "Why are you here?" she demanded. He turned James Carter. "Just a night janitor?" Or so she thought. He met her eyes, unshaken. "Because your people are breaking," he said quietly. Charlotte frowned. "This isn't your job." James didn't argue. He just plated the food, and everything she believed about running her company began to unravel. Charlotte Sinclair had not arrived at the top of Meridian Technologies by accident. She had built her reputation over 14 years with a philosophy that many admired from a distance and feared up close. Deliver results, remove what does not perform, and never confuse sentiment with strategy. At 39, she ran a company of nearly 400 employees, held 3 board seats, and had been profiled in every publication that mattered. None of those profiles had ever used the word warm. Meridian was in the middle of the most consequential quarter of its existence. A contract worth $240 million, a logistics automation deal with one of the country's largest freight networks, was weeks away from either signature or collapse. Charlotte had restructured 3 departments, replaced 1 vice president, and extended the standard working hours across the project team without a formal announcement. The expectations simply arrived, the way all expectations did at Meridian, silently and with full force. The company had always run at high pressure, but in the weeks leading up to the contract deadline, that pressure had crossed into something different. Desks were rarely empty before 10 at night. The building's air recycling system hummed constantly, circulating the same stale warmth through floors full of people who had stopped asking when they could leave. Coffee machines ran dry by noon. The small ergonomic details the company had once advertised in its recruitment materials, adjustable desks, natural light, a meditation room on the 8th floor, had become architectural irony. James Carter arrived each evening at 6 and finished his rounds by midnight. He mopped floors, restocked supply rooms, emptied bins, and said very little to anyone. The staff on the floors he covered knew him by the soft sound of his cartwheels and the fact that the hand soap dispensers were always full by morning. He was 37 years old, and he had once been something else entirely, though no one in the building knew that yet. What they did notice, eventually, was the food. Not at first. At first, it was only the smell, something savory and honest, drifting from the direction of the staff kitchen on the 14th floor, sometime around 9 in the evening. A few people assumed it was a delivery. A few others were too tired to wonder, but it was always there, quiet as James himself, carrying warmth into a building that had forgotten the concept. On the night Charlotte came down looking for a bottle of water she had left in the kitchen refrigerator, she found something she had not expected. A man who did not flinch when she walked in. The kitchen held the scent of roasted garlic and something herb thyme, maybe rosemary, and it struck her as almost aggressively domestic in a space designed purely for function. James Carter stood at the wide commercial range that the building's original designers had installed for catered events, and that had since been used for nothing more ambitious than reheating soup. He had a pan going on 2 burners. There were vegetables on the cutting board. There was a small stack of containers on the counter beside him, each sealed and labeled. Charlotte stepped inside. Her presence usually rearranged the atmosphere of any room she entered. James did not appear to receive the memo. "This is a restricted-use kitchen," she said. "After hours, personal cooking is not permitted under the facility guidelines." He reduced the heat on one of the burners before he responded. "I know. Then you're aware you're in violation." "I'm aware." She looked at the containers. "Who is that for?" He glanced toward the hallway. "The team on 16. They've been here since 7 this morning. Most of them skipped lunch." He paused. "And dinner." Charlotte looked at the containers again. "There were 11 of them. That's not your job," she said. He considered her for a moment, not with defiance, with something closer to patience. "Maybe not," he said. "But someone's got to do it." She left without another word. But the smell followed her back to her office, and the 11 containers stayed in her mind longer than she would have liked. Charlotte did not lose sleep over much. She had trained herself out of the habit years ago, around the time she learned that most problems that felt urgent at midnight looked manageable by 6 in the morning. But the conversation in the kitchen sat differently. It was not the violation of policy that bothered her that was straightforward, and she knew exactly how to handle it. It was the way he had said it. Someone's got to do it. Not as a rebuke, not as a challenge, simply as a statement of fact, delivered the way someone states that the weather is cold or the road is long. In the days that followed, she began to notice things she had not noticed before. The team on the 16th floor, the core engineering group running point on the freight contract, was functioning at a steadier pace than the other divisions. Not dramatically, subtly. Fewer errors in the daily status reports. Less latency in the overnight communications. One of their senior developers, a woman named Priya, who had looked genuinely hollowed out 3 weeks ago, was now arriving each morning with something resembling composure. Charlotte had noticed Priya's deterioration and filed it under an acceptable casualty of the project cycle. Now she found herself noting the reversal with equal attention and less certainty about what it meant. Charlotte mentioned none of this to anyone. She filed it away. Then one of her operations managers, a precise and humorless man named Douglas, submitted a formal grievance. Someone was using the 14th floor kitchen for unauthorized food preparation. The activity was a potential liability issue, unsanctioned use of commercial equipment. Possible allergen exposure for staff. Douglas wanted the matter escalated and the responsible party identified. Charlotte read the grievance twice. She told Douglas she would look into it. Then she pulled the building access logs for the past 3 weeks. James Carter, 14th floor, 47 minutes, on average, beginning at 8:45 each evening. She authorized the investigation Douglas had requested. It was the only rational response. What she did not tell Douglas or anyone was that she had also started reviewing which teams were meeting their project benchmarks, and that the numbers from 16 kept coming back clean. James was called to the Human Resources office on a Wednesday afternoon. The HR director, a careful woman named Sandra, walked him through the policy violations methodically. Unauthorized use of company facilities, potential food safety liability. The investigation had been formally opened. He listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When Sandra finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. "If it's a problem," he said, "I'll stop." Sandra had expected more, a defense perhaps, or at minimum, an explanation. She had conducted hundreds of these conversations, and most of them involved at least some self-justification. James offered none. He simply sat there, composed and utterly without grievance, and waited for whatever came next. What came next, Sandra had not anticipated. Marcus Webb, a senior developer from the 16th floor, who had not been scheduled anywhere near the HR department that afternoon, appeared in the doorway. He had clearly come directly from his desk. His badge was still clipped to his jacket, his laptop bag still over one shoulder. He looked at Sandra and then at James and said, clearly and without preamble, that he needed to speak on behalf of his team. For the next 8 minutes, Marcus described what the past 3 weeks had actually looked like for the people on 16. The 22-hour stretch 3 weeks back, when a critical data pipeline had failed and the team had stayed through the night to rebuild it. The afternoon that 2 team members had gone without eating because there was no time to leave the building and no one had thought to order anything in. The evening James had appeared with those containers quiet, unannounced, and left them in the hallway outside the conference room without making anything of it. "We finished the rebuild," Marcus said. "We hit the checkpoint on time. I don't know how much of that is him, but I know it's not nothing." Sandra said she would note his statement in the file. James thanked Marcus and did not make eye contact with him, as though receiving credit made him uncomfortable. Charlotte heard all of it from Sandra's written summary that evening. She read it once, then set it on her desk and looked out the window for a while. The crisis, when it came, announced itself the way crises always did, not with a single catastrophic event, but with a slow accumulation of smaller failures that suddenly reached a threshold no one had prepared for. The project team on 16 had been operating at maximum output for 61 days. The freight contract required a functioning prototype of the automated routing system, one capable of processing 400,000 shipment decisions per day, with an error rate below 0.3%. They were close. They had been close for 2 weeks. But close, at this scale, was its own particular form of torture. On a Tuesday night, a data architecture error that had been sitting dormant inside the system for 3 weeks surfaced during a stress test. It was not catastrophic in itself, but fixing it meant unwinding roughly 40 hours of work. The team lead, a methodical man named Kevin, sent Charlotte the incident report at 11:15. She was still in the building. She escalated immediately. She brought in 2 additional developers from the data infrastructure team. She extended the sprint deadline internally and told the board the prototype would be ready by the end of the following week. She sent a company-wide message that night, with language about collective effort and the importance of the contract. The message was precise, confident, and utterly devoid of acknowledgement that the people reading it had not been home before midnight in 3 weeks. Then she increased the pressure. She added 2 mandatory status meetings per day. She moved the project management software to live update mode so she could monitor progress in real time. She sent individual messages to team leads asking for hourly check-ins on the error fix. She was present, visible, and relentless. All the things she had always believed a leader needed to be in a crisis. What she had not accounted for was that a system pushed past its limits does not respond to more pressure by performing better. It responds by failing in new and compounding ways. By Thursday afternoon, the team on 16 was making more mistakes, not fewer. A junior developer named Alicia, 26 years old, one of the strongest coders on the team, made a syntax error in a routing function that took 4 hours to trace and another 2 to correct. She had been awake for over 30 hours. When Kevin asked her if she needed a break, she said no, she was fine, and then made the same error again. At 4:17 on Thursday afternoon, Alicia stood up from her workstation, walked to the corridor, and sat down against the wall with her hands in her lap. She did not cry. She simply stopped moving, in the way that a machine stops when its core temperature exceeds its operational range. Charlotte received the report from Kevin 6 minutes later. She stood in her office for a long time after she read it. Then she sat down, and for the first time in a very long while, she did not know what the correct next move was. James had not stopped. He had received the formal warning from HR on Wednesday and accepted its terms without argument. He understood that using company facilities for unauthorized food preparation was a violation, and he told Sandra he would not do it again. He meant it. What he had not promised was that he would stop caring about the people on the 16th floor. On Thursday evening, the same evening, Alicia had sat down in the corridor. James arrived for his shift and finished his regular duties on the floors below 16 in record time. Then he went home. His apartment was 20 minutes away by bus. He had a daughter named Grace, 8 years old, who was staying that week with his sister while he worked the late rotation. He went home, cooked for 2 hours, and came back. He brought the food in his personal containers. He left it at the entrance to the 16th floor with a note that said only, "For the team, take a real break. 20 minutes. The work will still be there." He had made a chicken and white bean soup, something he knew would stay warm inside the containers. Something easy to eat quickly, something with enough protein to hold a person through another 4 hours of close work. He had thought about this on the bus ride back. He had always thought about food the way other people thought about engineering, as a set of problems with human variables. What does this person actually need right now, at this hour, in this condition? The answer was rarely the same as what they said they wanted. He did not know that Kevin had seen him leave it. He did not know that Kevin had read the note aloud to the room. He did not know that all 11 people in that room, including Alicia, who had returned to her desk, had stopped for 22 minutes and eaten something warm and slept briefly with their heads down on their folded arms. What he did know, when he came back the following morning to clean the floor, was that the containers were stacked neatly by the door with a handwritten word on the top one. "Thank you." The prototype error was resolved by Friday night. Kevin's report to Charlotte the following Monday began with the line, "We hit the checkpoint." At the end of that Monday's status meeting, Kevin said, almost as a footnote, "I want to be honest about something. The last push wouldn't have happened the way it did without James Carter." Charlotte said nothing, but she noted the name. She started with the HR file. It was thinner than she expected. 1 formal warning, 1 prior address correction, a clean performance record across 14 months. Then she pulled his application from onboarding records. The employment history section listed 2 years at a hotel's culinary operation, 1 year consulting for a restaurant group, and before that, 4 years as executive chef at a restaurant in the city that Charlotte recognized. She had eaten there once, at a business dinner, years ago. She remembered the food. She sat with that for a moment. She requested the full background summary from her chief of staff and received it by mid-afternoon. James Carter had been trained at one of the country's top culinary programs. He had run a kitchen with a team of 19. He had left the industry, had walked away from what the file described as a promising career trajectory 3 years ago. The file did not explain why. It only noted a gap of 8 months between his last culinary position and his application to Meridian's facilities team. Charlotte filled in the gap herself, later, from a conversation she would not have expected to have. It was a Friday evening, and she had stayed late again, a habit so ingrained it had stopped registering as a choice. The building at that hour had a particular quality. The daytime noise stripped away. The work that remained more visible. The people who had stayed reduced to the truest version of what they were willing to give. She had always thought of it as her best time to think. Tonight it felt, for the first time, like something closer to loneliness. She passed the 14th floor hallway on her way back from the printer room and saw a light under the kitchen door. She stopped, then pushed it open. James was sitting on the counter near the window with his phone in his hand, not cooking. He was on a video call, his voice low and easy, and on the screen Charlotte could make out a small face, a child, 8 or 9 years old, with her father's same calm eyes. "I'll be home Sunday," he was saying. "We'll make the pancakes, the blueberry ones." He looked up and saw Charlotte in the doorway. He didn't startle. He told his daughter he loved her, and said goodnight, and set the phone down on the counter. "I'm not cooking," he said. "Just needed a minute." Charlotte looked at him, the files, the food, the phone call, the calm, and felt something rearrange itself behind her sternum. "What happened to the restaurant?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My wife got sick. I needed to be home more." He paused. "She passed about 3 years ago." Grace was 5. Charlotte did not say she was sorry. The words would have been accurate and completely inadequate. She looked at the window instead. "You went from running a kitchen to mopping floors," she said. "The hours are predictable," he said. "I know exactly when I'll be done. She needs that from me right now." Charlotte nodded once and left. She did not sleep easily that night. The board meeting happened on a Monday. Charlotte had called it herself, which was unusual ordinarily. The quarterly reviews ran on schedule, and she controlled the agenda without needing a special session. But the contract was 12 days out. The prototype was performing, and there was a personnel matter she had decided could not wait for the regular cycle. She presented the project update first. Solid numbers. On track. The board was pleased and expressed it in the measured language boards use when they are genuinely relieved. Then she raised the matter of James Carter. The room shifted almost immediately. One of the senior directors, a man named Gerald Holt, who had been on Meridian's board since its founding, and who held the particular conviction that process and policy were synonymous with professionalism, leaned forward before Charlotte had finished her first sentence. "He was warned," Holt said. "There's a process for this. We follow it." "He was warned for using a kitchen," Charlotte said. "He used it to feed a team that was working around the clock for the company's most important contract. That's irrelevant. The rules exist for a reason. The rules exist to protect the company," Charlotte said. "The question is whether we're enforcing them in a way that actually does that." Another director, a younger man named Preston, who had joined the board the previous year and had spent most of this morning's meeting looking at his phone, set the phone down and said, without looking up, "He's a janitor. This is a lot of institutional energy for a janitor." The word landed in the room with a particular weight. Charlotte looked at Preston for a moment. She had hired him because he was analytically precise and commercially aggressive, and he had been both of those things reliably for 18 months. She had never had a reason, before now, to consider what kind of person those qualities were attached to. "He's a trained executive chef who left his career to take care of his daughter after his wife died," she said. "He has spent the last 3 weeks keeping our engineering team functional, under conditions that we created, and that I have not, until now, adequately addressed." She paused. "His job title is not relevant to any of that." Holt said that regardless of his background, the policy had been violated, and the company had a liability exposure. Charlotte said, "Maybe the problem isn't him. It's us." The room went quiet, in the particular way rooms go quiet when something true has been said that no one has prepared a response to. She did not fire James Carter. She did not suspend him, reassign him, or allow the investigation to proceed to its logical conclusion. She closed the HR matter, noted in the file that the circumstances warranted managerial discretion, and submitted a proposal to the board within the week, a formal review of Meridian's employee wellness and operational sustainability practices, with particular attention to how teams were being supported during high-stakes project cycles. The proposal passed. Holt abstained. Preston voted yes, which surprised her. Within 2 weeks, the company had implemented mandatory rest periods during high-intensity sprints, a catered meal program for teams working past 8 in the evening, and a pilot wellness role, a position focused on team health and morale monitoring during project cycles, with a formal job description to be finalized in the coming month. The engineering team on 16 hit every benchmark in the final stretch. The prototype logged an error rate of 0.21% across 72 hours of live testing. The freight contract was signed on a Thursday afternoon, and Charlotte shook hands with the client's CEO in the glass-walled conference room on the top floor, while the team on 16, 14 flights below, heard the news from Kevin and sat for a moment, in the good quiet of a thing finally finished. Charlotte found James in the corridor outside the stockroom that evening, refilling a supply cart. She had not planned what she was going to say. She rarely found herself in that position. "I owe you an explanation," she said. He looked at her. "You don't." "I do." She leaned against the wall. "I've been running this company like a machine for a long time. High input, high output, and the assumption that anyone who couldn't sustain the pace wasn't suited for the work." She paused. "I think I've been wrong about that. I think I've been wrong about a lot of things." He set the cart to the side and crossed his arms loosely, listening in the way he always listened completely, without filling the space. "People don't break because of work," he said, after a moment. "They break because no one sees them." She had been thinking about those words since the night in the kitchen, when he had said something like them for the first time. They landed differently now, in the corridor, with the contract signed, and the team finally sleeping, and the whole long season of pressure beginning to ease. "How did you know what they needed?" she asked. He thought about it. "I've cooked for people my whole life. You learn, pretty quickly, that food isn't really what they're after." He looked at the cart, then back at her. "What they're after is the feeling that someone thought about them." Charlotte looked down the corridor, at the lit windows, at the building that had been her entire world for the past decade. She thought about the press profiles, the board meetings, the restructuring plans, the $240 million signature on a piece of paper on the top floor. She thought about Alicia sitting in the corridor with her hands in her lap. "I've been very good at thinking about the company," she said. "I know," he said, without judgment. There was no edge in it, no subtle reprimand, dressed as neutrality. It was simply what it was, the acknowledgement of a fact, offered by someone who appeared to hold no grievance about any of it. That absence of resentment, Charlotte thought, was either the mark of an unusually forgiving nature or the mark of someone who understood something about people that she had not yet learned. She suspected it was the second thing. They stood in the corridor for another moment, the air between them carrying something neither of them named. Then she pushed off from the wall and straightened her jacket. "Get home to Grace," she said. He almost smiled. "She'll want to hear about the pancakes." The season that followed was the quietest Meridian had seen in years. Not empty quiet, but the productive kind. The kind that sounds like people working at a pace they can sustain. The catered meal program ran smoothly. The mandatory rest periods took 2 weeks to stop feeling like a novelty, and began to feel, instead, like simple decency. 3 team leads submitted feedback through the new internal channel that the changes had already improved output quality on their floors. A 4th wrote that the biggest difference was harder to quantify. People had started talking to each other again at the coffee station in the morning. Small talk, mostly. But the kind of small talk that meant something, the kind that meant people still had some of themselves left at the end of the day. Douglas, the operations manager who had filed the original grievance, reviewed the pilot wellness role description and said to his own evident surprise that it was a well-constructed position. James Carter applied for the wellness role in the 2nd week it was posted. He was not the only applicant. He was, however, the one who arrived at the interview already knowing the names of every person on the 16th floor, their dietary restrictions, and the approximate hour each evening when their focus began to collapse. He was offered the position on a Friday. He accepted it, then went home and told Grace that he had a new job, that he was still going to be at the same building, but that his job now was to make sure the people who worked there were doing all right. Like a doctor? She asked. More like a cook, he said. She thought about this for a moment and decided it made sense. The contract anniversary fell on a Thursday, 4 months after the signature. Charlotte had not planned any formal acknowledgement. That was not her instinct. And the company had moved on to its next challenge already, a platform expansion that was consuming most of the architecture team's attention. But late that evening, walking back from a board call, she found herself on the 14th floor, without entirely meaning to. The kitchen light was on. She pushed the door open. James was at the range, 2 burners going. The counter organized with the particular efficiency of someone who spent their early career managing kitchens for large numbers of people. There were containers stacked and ready. The smell was the same one that had stopped her in this hallway months ago, warm and grounded, carrying the suggestion that someone had taken time with it. He looked up. He had not startled the first night, and he did not startle now. Charlotte stepped inside. She stood for a moment, looking at the pan, at the organized counter, at the containers labeled by floor and by name. "What are we cooking tonight?" she asked. James Carter looked at her for a moment, the same steady look he had given her the night she had asked him why he was there, back when the answer had seemed to her like a provocation, and had turned out to be something far simpler and far more important. He handed her a spoon. "Roasted chicken," he said. "You stir." She took the spoon. She did not ask if she was doing it right. He did not tell her she was doing it wrong. For a little while, neither of them said anything at all, and the silence was not the kind that asks to be filled. It was the kind that means 2 people are, for once, simply present in the same place, at the same time, without an agenda between them. And in the warm, amber light of a kitchen that had quietly become the most honest room in the building, the question that had started everything, "Why are you here?" had finally found its answer. Not in words. In the simple, unglamorous, entirely human act of one person standing beside another, making sure that at the end of a long night, no one went unseen.